the mind is an incredibly powerful tool, okay, but at the same time, it's also an incredibly weak tool. Okay, so think of the spear. So if the spear in the right direction is an incredibly powerful force, okay, and trained in a certain way is very lethal. And, depending on who's listening in terms of their weapons experience, spear is seen as a very high-level weapon, and because it can defeat many other weapons, range-wise and skill-wise. Mm-hmm. But equally, the spear coming out can be tapped lightly on its side, and it can go left to right.
Yeah.
So the mind can be very strong if trained correctly, but you have to acknowledge its weakness, its ability to be distracted, its ability to turn on itself as well. And I think that's what we see in the world a lot, that the world is engineered by very clever people with very strong intentions of damaging and separating us. So it's no doubt that we struggle, because it's designed for us to struggle. So the mind needs to be trained to acknowledge that and see it wherever it sees it, and then it can deal with it in whatever way it wants. Or rather, I'm not saying the mind's separate to the human, but whatever way the mind or the person wants it to go. But if it's not, the mind will think it's strong, but be, distracted, and then turned in the way that the powers that be, or whatever that might be, want things to go. Yeah. So then you have problems. You have mental health problems.
Hello, this is Tina, and today I'm joined by Ben Morris of Tai Chi Professional. Ben is and has been a student of Asian martial arts, East Asian martial arts for over 20 years, doing competitions and even winning competitions from time to time, which is where we want to be with this. He has published a number of books on martial arts and also philosophies of the Orient. And Ben is a health psychology lecturer at the Leeds Trinity University. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Tina.
How are you doing?
Nice to see you.
Yeah,
I'm good.
You too.
I'm good.
I think one of the things that really intrigued me was the fact that you are a lecturer of health psychology and how that relates to your own practice of what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I guess as a health psychologist, or someone who certainly my work to date, my research to date, has looked at transformation and change, ways to motivate people to maybe do things in maybe a healthier kind of way. Tai Chi offers you a vehicle for doing that as well. And of course, when people come to Tai Chi, they often are looking for that transformation, or they find the need for a transformation whilst they're doing the Tai Chi. I guess doing health psychology, you approach people telling them that they might have a problem, and then you try and help them with that problem in whatever way you stipulate, in a sense. So the two aren't mutually exclusive, but they may become the problem from a slightly different angle, which I always think is really useful, to come at things from different angles, to genuinely come from things at different angles, not simply just play lip service to things. So my sciencey head, for the want of a better term, and my non-sciencey head, so that's sort of the stuff that I would say can't necessarily be measured yet, but isn't nonsense, isn't fairy tales. I think those two approaches really complement each other really well. And that creative process that you get in Tai Chi, and that I've had in Tai Chi almost my entire Tai Chi time and martial arts time, because my teachers have been very generous in that respect. They allow creativity to occur, does feed into my professional psychology work as well. So for me, it gives, they each give an outlet to the other. In a sense. When I'm being too creative and too run away in my Tai Chi, I get pulled back down to earth by my psychology, and then vice versa. So they complement each other nicely.
I find it interesting that using Tai Chi as an analogy, when you're passing stuff on, I think often we get this sort of fixed idea of things, but if we can train to listen enough, it kind of has a life of its own.
Yeah, certainly. And as I've been given the opportunity to teach from my teachers, and then going a little bit more beyond that, kind of almost leaving the family home a little bit and being encouraged to do so. I think those three distinctions are very important to keep in mind. And when I'm teaching, I always try and start off as best I can by just stating kind of where I'm at in that class. So whether it be the first one, which for me is more about being a lineage holder, although my teachers wouldn't necessarily say lineage as a word. I know lots of Chinese, Japanese teachers do hold on to that idea, and I guess in that sense, I prescribe to that idea of lineage a little bit. So how I was taught it, how I was corrected when I did it, letter of the law almost, which of course can deviate from what other teachers will do as well. So all of a sudden we have this difference. But I make it very clear, this is how I was taught it. This, whether it be basic or whether it be very complex, this is how I was taught it. And my teachers are very good in the way that they measure the occasion. So they'll give you more when you need it and less when you maybe need less. Yeah. And then there's the me. So there's my Tai Chi. Once again, that's the stuff on YouTube that people will say, that's not Tai Chi. What's that? Because what they're saying is that's not what I acknowledge as being Tai Chi, which is completely valid, because that might come from their lineage or might come from their personal experience. But that's the bit where I'm saying, this is me as a teacher, as a practitioner, always a practitioner first. This is how I understand it at this moment in time, and this is how I want to pass that bit of knowledge on. Okay. And I make the distinction between the lineage, which is almost me being my teachers, or me aspiring to being my teachers, and me being my own practitioner. And then there's the third one, which has arisen. So I haven't pursued it. I haven't tried to rush it, but it's decided that sometimes when you're doing form, sometimes specifically when I'm trying to write a lesson plan, and my teacher's always about, you write a lesson plan and you formulate what's going on in your head. And as a lecturer at university, that is clearly what we have to do. So Tai Chi is no different in that respect. It's a more physical process of teaching, but in a sense, it has to start from some kind of plan and structure and endpoint for the student. But in doing that, stuff happens. So ideas come into my head, little bits of lines that I've read over years and years ago come into my mind. I rush back to try to find that book, the reference to that, and try and understand it from a different viewpoint. Stories come out as well. So I wrote a few kids' story books based on philosophy, which, once again, I'll say it's philosophy of the East. I'm not Chinese, I'm not Japanese, I'm not, Malaysian or anything. I'm not claiming to be East Asian, but I would claim to be being inspired by that philosophy. So the idea was I took from my own personal experience, and the stories kind of happened, and I just took them and I wrote them down. And then I sort of waited, for the nudge almost to say, maybe someone else, one other person in the world might want to listen to this. So that was an inspirational point for me. When you are doing form work, sometimes something will happen. So Yang style, for me, classic example in Yang style, I find an extra curve or a silk reeling movement that wasn't there before, as far as I was aware, in my experience of doing that form. And I'll go, oh, that's nice. And then I go, am I going to keep it? Am I going to let it go? When I practice Chen style, you'll find the circle, and then you'll find, as they like, the circle within the circle. Mm-hmm. And then the stuff you've heard in the past from other teachers starts to make sense. Oh, the circle in the circle. And then you'll do it a few more, hold on to it. So it's that kind of idea of almost letting the Tai Chi philosophy kind of exist around you and allowing it to feed you at whatever time it wishes to feed you. And that sounds a little bit strange. It almost sounds a bit mystical, a bit Taoist. When I'm not a Taoist.
Funny though.
Just from my experience, yeah, isn't it funny? Yeah. From my experience, that's what I've had. So I've just kind of embraced it in a sense. And whenever I've gone too far, and I've read some quite interesting books in the time I've been studying Asian martial arts, some very kind of interesting stories, superhuman abilities. And that's when I've always gone back to my psychologist mentality of going, is that one step too far? Can that be measured? Does that make sense? And that kind of pulls me back down a little bit to a centered position. So, enjoy the fanciful stuff, but
yeah.
I find people they overreach. So even in the fanciful stuff, there is good stuff. But if you overreach, you lose your root, you lose your context.
I guess it's that
different.
Yeah, that idea of balance again, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's good to to strive and be enthusiastic about those maybe slightly more fanciful side of things, but without the grounding, it can sort of go off on one a little bit.
Yes, and you can't discount the need for experience. And often quality experience often takes time, which is, I guess, why you talk about it being a long-term approach. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you can't have an amazing experience in the first Tai Chi session, which actually informs a lot of your practice afterwards. So it's not as though you've got to do the years, as it were. I think by doing the years, you have more opportunities to experience things, because you won't necessarily experience, first Tai Chi session has a profound experience upon you as a student. Don't expect the second one to do the same, because by the third one, you'll be looking at the door when the class has started, and the fourth one, you won't even turn up for the class. So it's almost like you've got to allow time. But if I take the analogy of judo practice for one, and I think one of the most important things Tai Chi practice should get involved in is some kind of grounded physical activity, whatever that might be. It could be running, it could be football, it could be anything. Judo for me is the mother system. It's where everything comes from. And it's what inspires my style of Tai Chi, or my mentality when I'm doing my Tai Chi. So in judo, you might have some natural ability. You might be a big person. You might be very flexible. Double jointedness also really helps. I've had the pleasure of rolling with people who are double jointed. It's not a nightmare because they don't function the same. It's like, it's not a human body. It doesn't make sense. But the analogy is that, you might roll for an hour. You might win 5. It's win 5. You might lose 5. So you come out neutral, and you rely upon your natural ability in the early days, and later on you start to learn the qualities of the experiences you've had up to that date. So in judo, you don't get your black belt in a year. In most traditional martial arts, if you have a black belt, whatever a black belt means, it's a level of expertise. You don't get it in a year. It doesn't matter if you have natural ability. You don't earn it. It's earned through the blood, the sweat, the tears, the reflection, the depression, all these emotions. That's what earns you that qualification, if you like. I've always thought that, we all come to push hands with different mentalities and different ideas, and often the first task is to get rid of the ideas and the misconceptions. So that's the major barrier, but that's kind of by the by. The idea of pushing or sensing hands being a conversation kind of opens the idea to actually being a communication between two people, which, unless I've got it very wrong, is what most people aim to teach when they're teaching pushing hands or sensing hands, a communication between two people. So what you do is you take it away from the unfamiliar. So lots of people aren't familiar with physical contact. I was lucky with judo. Judo is all physical contact. A bit of bowing at the beginning and a bit of bowing at the end, and a few Japanese words are thrown around, but it's physical contact for however long the class happens. So I take the mysterious, as some people might see, the physical contact, and I say, think of it like a verbal conversation. And lots of people have conversations all day long. So, this is not an unusual thing for them to reference. And think about, so if I've got a really big, strong guy and he's a bit mean, I'll paraphrase what I otherwise think of certain people who practice push hands, but they're a bit mean, they're a bit aggressive. It doesn't matter who they're pushing with. It's as if they are shouting at the other person. Shout, 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 shout. At a very junior level, a basic level of push hands, all the other person will be receiving is this hail of volume, of loudness, of aggression. They won't be able to deal with it. And that's a natural response. Most people will respond in that way. Through Tai Chi training, you learn to acknowledge that loudness and you can respond accordingly. So you can either shout back, which is often what you see most men do. They will go, oh, I know this. I did this when I was playing rugby at school. Oh, yes, aggression meets aggression and something happens. But often, once again, the person who's been shouting the longest will win because they're better at shouting or better at pushing or whatever it might be. So the pinnacle of the art is essentially to take the idea of the conversation, and rather than having a shouting argument with someone, that you just talk quietly. Okay, and through talking quietly to the other person, you're still getting the message across to that person. Okay, whether it be a push or a verbal exchange. That's the analogy I have, and it comes in very useful. And I don't mean to be disparaging of anyone here, because certainly I'm not trying to be. And often you get the two camps. You get the people who don't want to push at all because it's scary, because they've seen the big shouty people that I just talked about, shouting and screaming and being aggressive. And then you have the shouty, screaming people who often like to hold the trophies up. I do competitions. That means I'm this kind of person. Incidentally, you can know them quicker than the quiet people. So from a martial arts perspective, it's much better to be a quiet person, certainly in the way that you communicate your body. A big shouty person can be dealt with relatively easy if you have a modicum of skill compared to a quiet person. And the quiet person might be a little old lady who doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't really want to know what they're doing, but he's kind of interested. It looks a bit, interesting. They talk about, the small weight defeating the large weight.
Yeah.
We talk about pounds, kilograms, I don't know. Let's make it, globally relevant. The small weight pushing the large weight.
We'll go with kilos then.
for our American audience, hopefully.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, of course.
Yeah. If all I can do is shout at the other person, then I'm not really realising the art form. I'm probably doing something different in reality. And the thing I'm doing different is also probably quite crude. So the classic example of the push hands comment on YouTube, oh, that looks like judo. Oh, that looks like freestyle wrestling. Well, I'll tell you now that if that's judo or freestyle wrestling, it's incredibly poor judo and freestyle wrestling. As poor as it is poor push hands. Yeah. So the people commenting don't have an appreciation of, so when you're doing judo, when you're doing freestyle wrestling, it is the subtle movements, it's the quiet voice that wins. That's the voice of the skilled person. You watch any Rickson Gracie, one of the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters of all time, probably one of the greatest fighters of all time that we know about, because he existed within a TV age. The Bruce Lee said, be like water. I would say, be like a quiet voice, in my pidgin English. That's kind of a metaphor.
But I guess it's this listening quality that we often look for in our Tai Chi practice. One of the passions with Tai Chi is that it's so relatable to real life. And if you are having a conversation with somebody, then it's good to have a conversation where you're listening and learning from the other person as well. I do prefer the phrase sensing hands rather than pushing hands, because pushing does sound like a competition, whereas sensing already implies this listening skill. You're listening to the other person, you're listening to your own responses and reactions. If you want to improve yourself, if you want to better yourself, surround yourself with people who are better than you. So you're not just listening to your own voice or degrading that.
I think it gives a different, additional meaning in my mind. Others might have already arrived at this point of what Chen Manqing talks about when we're talking about investing in loss. Because it's a wonderfully almost poetic statement that encourages people to not really understand it, I think. And I always thought, it means you take the weaker position, because somehow by taking the weaker position, you're gaining something. And yes and no, I think. So if the term, and this might be mistranslated, of course, the term investment to me is almost like a projection. So, okay, if at this moment in time I invest in something, the expectation is that I will gain something later on. Okay, so investing in loss is maybe losing something or not prospering at something at this point. However, the expectation is in the long term there'll be a gain. So I invest in loss, and then the second part of the sentence almost is to gain in the long term. So investing in loss is half the sentence. And then we see that this almost reflected in the way that Chen Manqing's form has been popularized. This idea, investing in loss means being incredibly soft. It does. However, if you start at the point of the pinnacle of the art, how are you ever going to get there? I don't, take a racing car driver. You don't take a young Lewis Hamilton who's a go-kart boy at 8 years old or whatever and drop him straight into an F1 car. If you do that, he crashes and dies. It doesn't work very well, okay? It just doesn't work. But you give him increments, okay, and he develops. And his potential is realised at an early age and then nurtured.
Yeah.
And in the same way, if that's what we want to see in the Tai Chi of the future, then surely that's how it needs to be taught. And if it was taught in a family, as the tradition goes, then presumably that was happening simply by the fact that it was in a family. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that people really talked about or that was emphasised in a syllabus somewhere. It was just, it's a family thing. That's what families do. Families nurture and they think about the long-term picture. Yeah. So they're not thinking about membership fees of students every year renewing. They're thinking about being with that person for a long period of time. And that's where I probably come as close to an Oriental martial artist as anything. It's in that kind of almost relationship with your teacher. Yeah. So I might not be around my teacher for periods of time, but my teacher is always there. And when I'm doing my forms, my teachers are always there. And when I'm doing my judo, my teachers are always there with the corrections. Yeah. And then the recorrections. They're always present in my mind, which creates a lot of noise sometimes. So you've got to be able to manage that noise. And the more things you do, the more noise there is, which is, I guess, why people say, be careful about how many things you learn, because too much noise means you can't actually make suitable corrections or measurements of what you're doing. So, I mean, and I'm not claiming to be an expert on this, but I think one of the tricks of being any teacher of anything, whether it be teaching people how to bake bread, I can smell my wife's bread, you see, in the background. She's very good at baking bread, very good. It's a real treat. Whether it be something like that, or whether it be a very complex art form like Tai Chi, or whether it be a topic area like human personality, which I teach, or research methods, it all comes down to fundamentals. So the fundamentals is trying to nurture certain qualities in students. And of course, the key to being a teacher is to not allow them to realise you're trying to embed those qualities in them. Kind of do it under the radar, okay? Because some students will be resistant to it because it's change, and change is resisted, as we see in the world. But if you can be subtle enough to kind of just gently and slowly work with students, identifying things within them, and there's listening. There is listening abilities in that, which is no different really to the sensing we do in sensing hands. So there's an analogy that's quite interesting, or an expression in judo, which I read a while ago, which I kind of agree with and disagree with, and it's very interesting that I have this kind of seesaw kind of thing with this. Is when you're doing judo, you're trying to defeat the person's body. Mm-hmm. That's it. You're not trying to beat their mind. That's fine at a basic level.
Yeah.
But at a more complex level, and you roll or you compete against more competent people, those competent people have connected the mind and body together. They might not know they've done it, but they've clearly done it. Mm-hmm. So you're not just defeating the body, you're defeating the whole, which is, I think, what we're trying to do in Tai Chi as well. Develop the whole, nurture it, and then grow it to something much more bigger than it's within its potential, but bigger than it would otherwise be. You go into a boxing class and people say spar, and if you're new, you're petrified. I still am petrified when I engage in those activities, but you realise there's lots of emotions. And as you get better, you start to acknowledge what those emotions mean and use them. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've done in my university lecturing. Use the emotions, don't deny them. I think there's a great wealth of knowledge and truth in that. If you deny emotions, then you're going to set yourself up for all sorts of problems, mental health problems, potentially, physical problems, manifested in the physical body. I guess Tai Chi and Tai Chi teaching, as you get half good at it and you still attend a regular class with your teacher, it becomes very much about managing the emotions, the expectations that your teacher has upon you, that you're in that first version of you in your Tai Chi, you're transmitting it correctly. Mm-hmm. You're holding on to the lineage. Acknowledging when you're kind of being corrected, even if you're thinking, but I'm not in the lineage mode, I'm in the me mode.
Yeah.
But taking it as medicine almost. It's not criticism, it's medicine. It improves you. It makes you stronger in both camps. You become stronger in the lineage mode, but also stronger in owning the stuff that's yours. Tai Chi group work is very good for emotional reflection and experience, and that's a really important thing that lots of people in other areas don't do. Like you don't hear rugby teams talking about, oh, mate, after that match that we won, we had like a 5-hour reflective gathering, didn't we? Yeah. Well, I guess they did. They probably drank a gallon of beer each.
Well, they do it in their own way, yeah.
It has a different quality to it, though, doesn't it?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
Different expectations going on there, I think.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the things that maybe Tai Chi does by accident. It creates very safe social environments for people to exist within. Mm-hmm. And that has benefit whether you identify as having problems or whether you don't identify as having problems. So from a therapeutic, and I'm not a therapist, I wouldn't plan to be a therapist, but from a therapeutic angle, that seems to be a really strong position to be in.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a pill, a magic pill that you can take, and if you don't need it, it has no ill effect. Mm-hmm. And if you do need it, it helps. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've met so many interesting people doing Tai Chi, and you don't meet them in other martial arts. I don't think you have different quality relationships in other martial arts, mm-hmm. which are still about family and brotherhood and sisterhood, yeah. And the idea of honor and respect, and this idea of responsibility, mm-hmm. of passing something or holding something for a period of time. But I think there's the very human angle that you get with Tai Chi,
yeah.
that almost isn't written down. It isn't in the Tai Chi classics, but it kind of is embodied in it all.
It's, very much part of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think so. We've got something that let's say I'm talking to you, Tina, about Chi. I know, it's a word, it's a symbol, and I guess to most people listening, that's kind of what it is, or it's an idea or an aspiration. So I put my scientist head on, and go, okay. What can be practically derived from it in the early days? Because I'm certainly in the early days of this stuff. You know, they talk about mastering chi or the body. You're talking about a long period of time. So I'm very much an infant. I'm at infant school still with that kind of thing. Creating the conditions in the body allows me to focus on the practical, the physical, which I'm more familiar with. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like I'm not investing in lots on this one, but I'm a kind of more investing in something that I'm comfortable with an expectation that the thing I'm not so aware of or au fait with will come as a result. So create the conditions for the body. There's lots of translations of Tai Chi classics which explain correct body position, but also correct feeling as well, because it's not just about mechanics. There's a feeling quality to what we do, which you can arguably see in people, whether they have, as my teacher talks about, they've got the thing, or whether they're not quite there at the thing. Yeah. I don't know what that is, but I think the expression is wonderfully aloof that it suits for me. So the thing, so you create the conditions which, incidentally or complementarily, also help with health, help with fighting, help with mental health, physical health. So it's a win-win. It's that magic pill again. It's a win-win situation. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, I've read many books, and I'm going to reference Master T.T. Lang. I think he talks about how we should be a baby or a child twice in our lives. The first is obviously when we are a child by chronological age, and then the second time is when we're much older. So for me, it's almost like we start at a perfect position, very flexible, very malleable. Chi flows. The baby in the mother's tummy is growing at a really impressive rate. The body's being created. There must be, if chi is anywhere, the chi is there, right? So it's the highest concentrations. And then we go into the world, and the world does all these things to us, pollution, stress, whatever it might be, that affect the body. And then we, over the course of life, we figure it out, or we hopefully try and figure it out across the lifespan. And then we arrive at old age, which is almost like the same as being the young child. So we're child twice. That's how I understand what he's saying. So creating the conditions for the chi to flow is to acknowledge that at one point chi flowed around our body freely, or whatever that is, the Chinese character, the energy field, the electrical field, the very practical things that we see in our body, things that creates, maintains homeostasis, keeps our heart beating at a regular rhythm. If you want to take kind of Western science, that stuff exists, okay? And then over the course of time, we correct the body, we create the condition better, and then when we're in old age, or if we're really good student, maybe when we're a little bit younger than old age, where the chi flows fully, and then I guess in the classical text we become a Taoist immortal and then float around bothering people.
Yes.
So there's that from our practice perspective. There's that idea that we have a journey, and practice takes us on that journey, and the journey is to improve our health, or certainly to bring us back to a place where we should have kind of developed from as a child. And then there's the second thing, which is sort of a mantra of mine. I'm giving truths here, secrets of myself. Being an example. One of my fundamental mantras is to be an example to whoever I'm around. And I fail at this on a regular basis. But that's part of acknowledgement, isn't it? But in acknowledging my failure, I can then learn where I failed and hopefully improve. And that's a lifelong process as well. And being an example, in setting the framework right, the chi, or whatever, the universal energy, energy flows through, around, or to people around me. There are many teachers that just being around, and this is another big up to Ronnie Robinson about bringing people together.
Absolutely.
Bringing very high-level teachers. And I would say a high-level teacher at Caledonia isn't necessarily the person on the billing. It can be the person that passes you a glass of whiskey on a night and you have a chat. And they're not a teacher and they don't claim to be a teacher, but you get as much wisdom from them as you would do from anyone. They to me are examples as well. So they create the condition in the universe or the world to maybe correct some of the problems, the imbalances in the world.
It's like the Tai Chi practice. You don't get it right every time, but you're kind of not supposed to, because that's the process.
That's what I was going to say. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to.
But you're trying and you're refining and you're listening and you're developing that quality, almost like resonance, harmonics. If you can resonate these qualities within yourself, I think that the people that are around you, like you say, even if it's not the teacher, if it's someone with a whiskey glass that you're having a conversation with, then these resonances, they come together, they spread out. And I think that's in the world that we live in and the media that we get in our society, unfortunately, there's not an awful lot of good, uplifting, positive news. And so we get this whole different kind of resonance. This is why I was so pleased with Tai Chi Caledonia this year, even though we couldn't come together in person. It's amazing that we can create this kind of space and environment even over these lumps of plastic, all of our monitors and all the rest of it, that there was still a feeling there that there is this network out there of people who are listening and developing and cultivating and appreciating.
Yeah, and I suspect what I felt that as well, and I suspect what others felt. Not to take away from any of the camps, but I have limited experience of other camps. But that quality doesn't necessarily require us to all be together physically. And I think that's the magic of Caledonia. To talk more about Caledonia, that there's a family-like quality where we come out of our schools and out of our systems and just kind of be for a little while, whether it be a week or a weekend or a day or whatever. And that cannot really be canned. That cannot really be. That just is. It's almost like a wonderful manifestation of something, and it doesn't ever change irrespective of the lineup. So you can have some very famous, like, big hitters, and you're like, and when I first started going, it was very much like, oh, I know that name. I read them in a book. Oh, they've got this, and this lineage, and wow, it's amazing. And I'd go along, and the point of Caledonia almost kind of equalizes a lot of that.
Yeah.
In a really nice, positive way. It's not like knocking people back down. It's about just saying that actually we're just hanging out together.
Yeah.
And we're going to show you some stuff, and that's wonderful. You know, whether you come to Tai Chi Caledonia the first year because you're a Tai Chi practitioner, but come back again the next year because you just thought, well, that's a nice place to be. I think a lot of people think that teaching is about holding on to students for dear life. And of course, if you're financially dependent upon that, that's understandable. And we have a lot of martial arts schools in Leeds doing various kicky, punchy styles. And they seem to be very much orientated around holding on to students. You have a grading every month, and it helps their students, but I think they're missing something. And I think they're missing that kind of non-attachment thing that, I went Buddhist, didn't I then? I also don't know much about Buddhism. Maybe that's what non-attachment is. More hate mail coming in.
We'll just dub all of this as Ben's interpretation of.
With some jingle music in the background.
Yeah, there you go.
And this has been my experience in the internal arts, that you get onto a discussion, whether it's with someone else or whether it's in a meditation or whether it's whilst you're driving down the street, you know, and ideas come into your head. And I don't know whether that's because Tai Chi fosters that or whether because the framework of Tai Chi allows space for you to kind of express your own self within it.
Yeah.
For me, that's a really nice quality it has, but I can't put that down to any one thing. It might just be down to me and my experiences, and I found Tai Chi at the right point in my life and then had enough in the bag already to say something about Tai Chi. So certainly my judo helped me a lot contextualize what push hands was in the early days, and have the freedom to, we talked about push hands competitions very briefly with a sort of a smile, because for me, and people won't believe me, but for me, push hands competitions are a synthetic environment. Okay, a lot of what we see is a function of having to have it timed, because you can't have a competition going on for days and days and days.
Sure.
And having limited space, you have to create an area which is square, which is strange. Square is a strange thing to use. Could be a circle, could be an octagon, it could be anything. Could just not have a boundary. And then you have to make some kind of quantitative measurement of skill. So within that, you create a perfect environment for a lot of aggression, a lot of rushing. The voices are loud, and often they are loud and they are strong, and they are too strong for you to demonstrate your softer skills. And that's been some of my experiences. So what we've always worked with at my teacher's school was we have a few ideas to play with. We train them for a period of months, and then we test them. And then if they work, we work on them a bit more. If they don't work, we figure out whether that failure was true or whether it was just a function of my failure at the time as a physical body. But doing it so many years and getting so much out of it mentally, much more than physically, because actually, in reality, we train much harder for the competitions than we do when we are competing in the competitions.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of time in the gym, time running the streets, time having continual bouts with fresh people, with less rules. So it's less constricted than a competition. That's much more physically demanding, and that's where my skill develops.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm able to show little bits of that in a competition. Oftentimes I'm just chasing the clock. So I engage in behaviours that are not as refined as I would want them to be on occasion. And sometimes I do something and I go, oh, wow. And that'll be enough for me. One little thing. I've gained a lot more from understanding how I am when I'm scared, when I've had a cortisol dump and my muscles aren't working. And I cannot explain that, because why are my muscles not working? I've trained for this. I'm strong. I'm ready to go. I've got a pedigree from previous competitions. I come from a school with a good tradition, a strong tradition of doing really well in competitions. So why am I falling to bits? Well, it's because my mind has gone, for the want of a better word. My body hasn't, but my mind has. So push hands for me in a competition environment is more about maintaining the mentality than winning the competition by a judge. And that also then translates into form work as well. So competitions aren't about medals. They aren't about points, although, you go to win because you train so hard. But the actual benefits are the mental aspects of experiencing what it's like to lose your mind, lose your body, and then be required to figure it out with someone else in a ring. Because for me, that's a really clever thing. That's the advantage. If anybody doesn't want to do a competition because they're nervous or scared, I would say that's the motivation to do it. Not to dumb the fear, but to experience it in a much more elevated fashion, which sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds bonkers.
It does, but it's really interesting because in a sense, if you put all that you've just said about that into real life, because we do all of our training and all of that, but we live in a nuts and bolts world and we interact with other people all the time. And I think that the process of training, and you say, how training, you train much harder for the competition than what you're actually putting in that moment in the competition. Those are the skills that you develop when you're training that stay with you, that help you interact with the world. And like you say, we can be fearful of many things in life as well. But actually, within reason, it's not a good idea to go and jump off a cliff because you're frightened of doing that. But, just being sensible about all of this. But but actually putting yourself in a position, then that really helps develop and helps you understand yourself better. And I think if you never face what's behind that door because you're frightened of it, you're always going to be frightened of it.
Yeah. I mean, if we kind of draw an analogy from Xingyi practice, so, and ironically, this does feed into when I'm talking to my students about personality. And this is another example of Tai Chi giving to me during a session. So I'll be teaching personality and I'll be talking about the ego and the power, the danger of the ego in Freudian theory. I don't talk on it too much because it's a bit of a contentious topic. Any psychologist out there will be like, I can't believe he prescribes the Freudian theory. Anyway, it's a very short, I have to give context to students. So I teach a bit of Freudian and neo-Freudian work. But to take it to the Xingyi analogy, the mind is an incredibly powerful tool, but at the same time, it's also an incredibly weak tool. So think of the spear. So if the spear in the right direction is an incredibly powerful force, and trained in a certain way is very lethal. And, depending on who's listening in terms of their weapons experience, spear is seen as a very high-level weapon because it can defeat many other weapons, range-wise and skill-wise. But equally, the spear coming out can be tapped lightly on its side and it can go left to right. So the mind can be very strong if trained correctly, but you have to acknowledge its weakness, its ability to be distracted, its ability to turn on itself as well. And I think that's what we see in the world a lot, that the world is engineered by very clever people with very strong intentions of damaging and separating us. So it's no doubt that we struggle because it's designed for us to struggle. So the mind needs to be trained to acknowledge that and see it wherever it sees it, and then it can deal with it in whatever way it wants. Or rather, I'm not saying the mind is separate to the human, but whatever way the mind or the person wants it to go. But if it's not, the mind will think it's strong, but be, distracted, and then turned in the way that the powers that be, or whatever that might be, want things to go.
Yeah.
So then you have problems. You have mental health problems, and physical problems. So once again, the manifestation of psychological trauma in the body, which anyone who's done an office job for any period of time will clearly see the manifestation of emotional distress in your back, in your neck, in your wrists, repetitive strain injuries, all sorts of problems. And that's actually one of the wonderful things about, and I'm going off a tangent again, but one of the wonderful things about Tai Chi is that it is both, at times, completely esoteric and strange. It's written in a foreign language, and not only that, but a foreign alphabet. And not only that, an alphabet and a language that's very complicated to learn, okay? But then at the same time, if you leave your mind open to it, you can see examples of it all around you. So almost the secret is, read the text, read the translations, understand it, but embody it. Don't see it as something out there, like in a book. The person who wrote this book down, these thoughts were in their body and in their mind. This is a vehicle for you to meet that person, whatever. I've got another judo book here, a very good judo book for any judo aficionados here. The book in itself is nothing. It's a tool. It's a transmission tool for me to get inside of the head and body of the person that wrote it. And then by turn, I get in the body and mind of their teachers. And that's how the lineage process works. Not to say that you can learn a lineage through books and videos and DVDs, but I can, if my level is such, I can borrow and adopt things from other people. Truth, actual truth, as opposed to facts and knowledge, because that's always interpretation. Truths are truths, whatever language, whatever face says them, however it's delivered. It could be in a football match. The truth about balance and centre can be the same as someone heading the football as it can be a boxer bobbing and weaving and keeping their centre, or someone casting a fishing line if they're fishing. That's a truth. It's a truth that is seen in examples throughout every activity that we do on the earth. You've got, truth and knowledge is a whole different debate, isn't it? People often want to attach so much to knowledge because that's theirs, rather than acknowledging truth, which they can borrow, but they never own.
I am going to say a huge thank you to you today, Ben. That's it's a lot of food for thought, and I really appreciate that you're coming at it from all kinds of different viewpoints, different martial arts as well, which is wonderful. Like you just said, truth is truth. Doesn't matter how you paint it. But now let me get this right. If you want to visit Ben's website, it is taichiprofessional.uk.
Yeah, no space. Yeah, no spaces, just as it is. Yeah,
as it is, all one there. And do you have, because you did the Tai Chi Caledonia session, which I believe is still up on Facebook, the Tai Chi Caledonia 2020 videos page, which you can find. I really enjoyed your session there as well, Ben.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And
my pleasure. My pleasure.
Great talking to you. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Cheers.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, then we can cut it there.